Could Joe Cullen be the next defensive coordinator of the Florida Gators?
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Tuesday. I am Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. You should Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. And the Florida Gators lost Austin Armstrong to the Houston Cougars. We have been reporting for a long time, and quite a few places have been talking about for a long time, that, hey, Ron Roberts might be on the way out as well. Dave Waters tweeted on Friday that a name to keep an eye on for the Florida Gators defensive coordinator job is Joe Cullen, the Kansas City Chiefs defensive line coach. And here's the thing, regardless of Ron Roberts' status, they're still likely to hire someone in a coordinator role because that's what Austin Armstrong was. The position coaches that you had were Gerald Chapman with the defensive line, Mike Peterson with the edges, Ron Roberts with linebackers, and Will Harris with the secondary. And so Austin Armstrong was strictly defensive coordinator. So regardless of how you feel about anybody else, it's likely that they're going to hire someone for a defensive coordinator role. Joe Cullen is in that. Again, Kansas City Chiefs defensive line coach. He was the Jacksonville Jaguars defensive coordinator in 2021 under Urban Meyer, who, of course, Urban Meyer, Florida legend, but also had a lot going on off the field. And he didn't make it past, week 11, I think it was. And when the new staff came in, so Doug Peterson and on all the people presently there, that replaced Joe Cullen. Right? Like Joe Cullen was not retained. Most of the staff, I think actually all of the on-field staff with the Jaguars was not retained when that transition happened from Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson. So Joe Cullen was not retained, and then he joined the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's been there ever since. As far as defensive philosophies that these coaches have, Joe Cullen with the Jaguars was one of the most aggressive defensive coordinators in terms of blitz rate. They had the fifth highest blitz rate in the entire NFL when he was the defensive coordinator. They were getting after everybody. I would be very interested to know what a Joe Cullen defense would look like. Let's say he is coming in and has play calling duties, right? I would be very interested to know what a Joe Cullen defense looks like. Because with the Jaguars, it was a lot of, 3-4, we'll call it. A lot of 3-4. A lot of blitzes, a lot of zone blitzes specifically. But he's been with the Kansas City Chiefs now for 3 seasons. And Steve Spagnuolo is the defensive coordinator there. He blitzes a good bit, usually zone blitzes. But it's also more of a 4-man front. And he uses a lot of sim pressures and creepers. I know, scary, scary, scary. I know that this Florida Gators fan base just has PTSD from hearing sim pressures and creepers. I get it, but it's a thing that Florida did this year. They just didn't call them those things and say those things in the interviews, and so no one cared. Crazy. So I'd be interested to know what Joe Cullen's defense would look like, because again, it'd be working with Steve, or he's been working under Steve Spagnuolo. So would it look more like a Steve Spagnuolo defense than what we saw from Joe Cullen? Would it be more of a, hey, I'm just going to come in and call your defense the way that you had it in place. I'm not going to come around and make a bunch of changes. Also, I do think that if Joe Cullen were to get hired, he would get hired as strictly the defensive coordinator title. Whether or not he's calling plays, I think he would take that Austin Armstrong spot of the defensive coordinator title because, again, he's a defensive line coach. been a defensive line coach for years. I don't see them getting rid of Gerald Chapman, right? And by saying I don't see that happening, it ain't happening, all right? So Joe Cullen coming in as strictly a defensive coordinator he would still have a hand in position coaching. He'd probably be bouncing around wherever's needed, but would be very interested. Like I talked about Steve Spagnuolo before the Joe Cullen stuff ever came out. We talked about Steve Spagnuolo just because of the job he did with the 49ers, facing the 49ers in the Super Bowl, where they tend to go with these condensed sets like Florida does. And what Steve Spagnuolo did was basically say, hey, if you come out in those condensed sets, I'm going to blitz the hell out of you. And I'm going to do it using DBs. Like I'm going to have someone lined up in the nickel, and he's going to blitz you. And that's how they destroyed the 49ers offense for a good bit. And so I'd be very curious to see if Joe Cullen would take that kind of approach where he blitzed linebackers more when he was with the Jaguars. But I'd be very interested to see what that defense would look like or what changes would come to it. Would just be interested to know what that would look like. I also think that it is worth noting that Steve Spagnuolo, again, the current Kansas City Chiefs defensive coordinator, and they are still in the playoffs. So if anything were to happen, it wouldn't happen until after they're eliminated, and it probably wouldn't be announced until after they're eliminated. But Steve Spagnuolo is presently interviewing for head coaching jobs. I think he's gone on 2 interviews so far, 2 virtual interviews, of course, so far for head coaching vacancies, of which there are 6, if I'm not mistaken. And I would just be interested to know if Spags took a head coach job somewhere else, would Joe Cullen be in the conversation to replace him as the defensive coordinator of the Chiefs? And how would that play into the potential of him joining the Florida Gators? So that's one. Also, I'd be very interested to know just how badly Joe Cullen would want to come to Florida. He turned down the Michigan job last year after Harbaugh and Jesse Minter went to the Chargers. Joe Cullen turned down the Michigan defensive coordinator job, which could have also been just that, hey, I think Sherrone Moore is kind of getting scapegoated, which I do think a lot of people thought going into this year was that he was kind of just being not scapegoated, but thrown into the fire and would be fired pretty quickly since he didn't have a big contract or anything. And if I'm not mistaken, started coaching without a contract in place. So it could have been that he turned it down for that reason. Could have been just that, hey, he didn't want to go to Michigan. But I'd be very interested to know. And obviously the fact that Waters even mentioned Joe Cullen's name probably indicates that there is at least a little bit of mutual interest there for Joe Cullen. There's another name that's been brought up quite a bit lately with the Florida Gators regarding a defensive coordinator job. We'll talk about that when we get back with Locked On Gators. Attending a new 12-team college football playoff game would be an incredible experience and brings fans together like never before. I mean, for me, one big thing is if the Florida Gators ever host a college football playoff game, because seeds 5 through 8 host a college football playoff game. It's 5, 6, 7, 8 hosts the first round on their campus. Man, I think we'd have to go to that one, right? And you wouldn't know that until shortly before the actual game. Luckily for you, Game Time is the best place to get last-minute tickets for games. I've told you guys 2 weeks ago, I went to go see the Knicks at the Wizards because I was in DC, and I just happened to look at Game Time, and the first thing that came up was Knicks at Wizards, and I said, you know what? Screw it, let's go. And so we went with Game Time. I love it. I go to concerts with it. It's the only way I buy tickets now. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. And there is another name that has been brought up quite a bit and quite publicly. And by that, I mean, we've seen notable people that talk about the Florida Gators or have connections to the Florida Gators tweeting about Jay Bateman. And again, this is a thing that now has been going on for about a month and a half of the tweets about Jay Bateman. Bring Jay Bateman back to defensive coordinator, all that. And he's a name that has been tied to Florida, and also for good reason, that he is maybe one of the most qualified candidates to take over this job as a defensive coordinator for the Florida Gators, while also having recruiting ties in the state of Florida, just in the sense that he was here. He was here for 2 years. Jay Bateman was the Florida Gators linebackers coach for the first 2 years of Billy Napier's tenure here. Then, and also let's get this one out the way. So at first, it seemed like a kind of slime ball move, right? Jay Bateman is the linebacker coach at the University of Florida for 2022 and 2023. 2023, or the end of 2023, so the 2024 signing day for people who were freshmen this year. Signing day comes and goes. Jay Bateman gets Miles Graham signed, gets Aaron Childs signed. And then the middle of the night, basically, reports start coming out that, hey, Jay Bateman's taking the job at Texas A&M, which was under Mike Elko's new staff. And so that was a big thing because Ernest Graham started tweeting about how there was a lack of communication with the coaching staff and the coaches, specifically talking about Jay Bateman and the University of Florida. And Ernest Graham started tweeting about that, and it became this whole spectacle, right? It became a whole thing for the entire day on Twitter about Ernest Graham being upset with the lack of communication by the Florida Gators coaching staff and Jay Bateman mostly. What many people will not tell you is that Jay Bateman had the intention of speaking with Miles Graham and Aaron Childs the next day, because this was a thing that happened very quickly. And by very quickly, I mean within a matter of hours, really. Happened very quickly. And so Jay Bateman was like, you know what? I will talk with them tomorrow and we'll knock it down. But Texas A&M, someone from Texas A&M, I don't know if it was boosters, reporters, whoever it was, leaked that Jay Bateman was coming to Texas A&M to be the defensive coordinator. And so that opportunity to really speak with them was never truly presented. They signed the contract. They're supposed to wait until Jay Bateman got to speak to the players. And before he got the opportunity to do that, someone leaked it. And that kind of spoiled the departure, kind of spoiled what was an incredible top 2 linebackers in the class for 2024. At least not spoiled it, but spoiled the signings of them, kind of soured them a little bit there. But would reunite him with Miles Graham and Aaron Childs. And he's someone with over a decade of play calling duties, play calling experience on defense. If I'm not mistaken, he's got like 16 years of defensive coordinating duties there. He's a defensive coordinator at Siena in 1999 before taking over as the head coach for 4 years. So he's got 1999. DC at Elon for 2006, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So that's 6 years total. Then another 3 at Ball State. Then another 5 at Army. And then a co-DC at North Carolina for 3 years. And then taking over the Florida Gators job as just the linebacker coach when the whole staff got replaced at North Carolina. So he was just linebacker coach then. Then he left here after 2 years to go to Texas A&M and be their defensive coordinator under Mike Elko. And this is another instance similar to talking about Joe Cullen working under Steve Spagnuolo, what that would look like. I'd be very curious what a Jay Bateman defense would look like, because one, he is someone that has kind of consistently changed his defensive philosophies over time. Again, he's been a defensive coordinator. I stopped doing the math after the Elon one, but I think what were we at? We were at 6 years at that point. And then another 3, so 9, then another 5. Yeah, so about 16 years of defensive play calling duty. And I say that because North Carolina, I'm not sure if he did it the full time, but he did do it at some point as the defensive play caller. But he would be someone that can come in and his defense changed again, because it's going to happen when you are a defensive coordinator for that long. And this year, he spent under Mike Elko, who's a great defensive mind, pretty modern defensive mind in terms of coverage and marrying that with the pass rush. So I'd be very curious. Also, would Jay Bateman try to call a more similar defense to what Florida's been calling compared to Texas A&M, which is not super different, but there's some differences because, again, now that these guys, like this defense, these defensive players know this defense, it would probably be best to come in and have someone who can operate this defense and just, change the names, the verbiage, whatever you want to call it, make some slight adjustments, but keep most of it the same. Change your tendency, sure. It's like, hey, we don't want to go as much too high. We want to go a little bit more single high. We're still going to call the same coverages and everything, just pre-snap, going to look different. Things like that. Don't make insane, drastic changes. Just keep things in check. Continuity is very important, and it's very overlooked in this day and age. But the Florida Gators could get that, at least with Jay Bateman, who, again, was here for 2 years. And he's a linebackers coach. So if Ron Roberts is on the staff, again, I've been saying I think Jay Bateman would come in as just a defensive coordinator. But also Jay Bateman, throughout his career, has history coaching the defensive line, linebackers, and safeties. He'd be able to help around in multiple spots, right? And if Ron Roberts, if the rumors are true and Ron Roberts does leave the Florida Gators, then guess what? Jay Bateman could step right in as the linebacker coach and defensive coordinator. It's also, I guess we'll bring up the possibility that, let's say Ron Roberts does leave the Florida Gators. It is very possible that you could bring in both Jay Bateman and Joe Cullen as co-DCs. One of them has play calling duties, probably Joe Cullen, just because I'm assuming because he wouldn't have the position tied to him. Jay Bateman would be your linebacker coach and co-DC. Wipe your hands of it there. Okay? Just a possibility of something that could happen. This is pure speculation, by the way. I'm not suggesting that is realistically going to happen, but I will speculate about things. DeShaun Purdie is someone that we've definitely never talked about. Definitely haven't spoken about him twice already in the past 4 days. We're going to do it again here on Locked On Gators. After the holiday hustle, there is nothing like giving your home a little TLC, and I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. So whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need, all within your budget. And we are looking to redo our living room. This isn't part of the ad copy. I'm genuinely saying we are looking to redo our living room. Wayfair is a website that we are looking at pretty consistently. Trying to find exactly what we want. That's the issue, right? The first apartment together. We don't know really what we're going to do, but it's fun. The free and hassle-free delivery, even for the larger items, is beautiful. Site's easy to navigate. I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. A sectional. I don't know these things until I'm looking at them. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style for every home. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. And Deshaun Purdie, like I mentioned, we did a whole live show about him on Saturday. He was a large portion of yesterday's show talking about the quarterback room, and we're going to talk about him again. Maybe for the last time we will ever have to say this name. Although I am positive that at some point I will mention this again, just in a very random video, but we'll see. But Deshaun Purdie has been released from his commitment to Florida. And this is noteworthy, we'll say, partially because, of course, you lost a key part of your transfer portal class, but also because yesterday and Saturday we were talking about what the possibilities are, right? It was, do you release him and just give him what he wants? Do you not release him and force him to enter the spring portal should he choose to do that? And a big part of that was that, hey, if you enter the spring portal, you can't sign with another SEC program. And Georgia is thought of as one of these schools, or thought of as the main school that was pursuing Deshaun Purdie. But now yesterday we get word that Deshaun Purdie has been released by Florida. But because he signed a grant of aid, I think was the official name of it. But because he signed a grant of aid with an SEC school, he cannot be in contact with any other SEC schools. So, which also the wording of that is very interesting. I'm sorry. I realized I was in the middle of a sentence and I'm stopping it. But the wording of that is very interesting because if he can't sign or he can't be in contact with another SEC school, is that actually better than him entering the transfer portal? Because if he can't sign with another Florida school or another SEC school, then he can't go there at all. Whereas if he were to wait here and then enter the transfer portal, he would be able to sign with an SEC school but would not be eligible for a year. So he'd have to sit a year. So is it actually better that you don't even get the option of, hey, go ahead, go to Georgia and sit a year? You're not supposed to be in contact with any other SEC schools. So that's interesting. There is another quarterback that the Florida Gators and the Georgia Bulldogs are going at it for on the recruiting trail in the transfer portal. It is Buffalo quarterback CJ Ogbonna. He is now a target that both Florida and Georgia are pursuing in the transfer portal. He entered the portal last week as a grad transfer. And before we even talk about him or the possibility of him being a Florida Gator, we do have to acknowledge this. CJ Ogbonna went to a junior college for 2 years before eventually coming to Buffalo. He went to somewhere else before that, I forgot. Then Buffalo, and now in the portal again. So he would be looking for a 7th year of eligibility, which is too many years, if we're being honest. But he'd be looking for a 7th year of eligibility. And the expectation is that he would get that 7th year of eligibility due to the Diego Pavia ruling from a couple of weeks ago, where Diego Pavia said that he should be allowed to play another year of college football because he was at a JUCO, and that should not take his eligibility away. And the NCAA pretty much put in a blanket one-time, hey, we're going to give it to you if you were running out of eligibility this year, if this was your last year of eligibility that just wrapped up. And if I'm not mistaken, it would be that for CJ Ogbonna. So the expectation is that he will get another year of eligibility because of his time that he spent at a JUCO. So CJ Ogbonna will likely be available to play in 2025, but I keep saying this just to make clear that there is still a slim chance that he's not eligible, and this would be a complete waste of time. Woo! But CJ Ogbonna overall, as far as looking at transfer portal additions, we say it's either someone in there that just finished their first year of college, which obviously not, or it's someone that has proven production at his previous spot. As QB1 of the Buffalo Bulls, CJ Ogbonna had completed 56.4% of his passes for 2,376 yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, as well as 440 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. Obviously, we can just talk about the obvious right away. Not exactly an awesome completion percentage there. It's not great to see someone complete just 56% of their passes in the MAC. I will at least acknowledge that when you account for drops, he would have completed 68% of his passes. So a pretty huge change there, right? His adjusted completion percentage is 67.7%. Actual completion percentage is 56.4%. So if you account for drops, that climbs a lot, which helps our case a lot. But also, we will say one of the better deep ball passers in the country. He went 25 for 59, completed 42% of his deep passes, which is a good percentage, by the way. 10 touchdowns, 3 picks, a 91.4 PFF grade when throwing deep. But this is similar to the DeShaun Purdie style of you like to take deep shots, and you're good at taking deep shots. You're mobile, and you at least have some experience playing at the FBS level. And I know that there's going to be people who talk about Deshaun Purdie coming from Buffalo. Sure. Counterpoint, Deshaun Purdie came from Charlotte, and we were cool with that. So I don't think that matters at all. Right? Like I don't care how much you're talking about the talent disparity. Group of five is group of five, right? So before anyone brings that up, it's kind of irrelevant considering the circumstances. And I will say that I don't think CJ Ogbonna is great. Granted, I have limited experience watching him, mostly against Toledo this past year, which he threw at least a touchdown. I don't think he threw any picks. But as we've talked about kind of frequently now with the transfer portal at quarterback specifically, and considering the Florida Gators situation where if you have not been listening, you're not going to get a starter quality quarterback to back up DJ Lagway. You're not going to get a 2024 blue chip quarterback to back up DJ Lagway for 2 full seasons and then maybe get a starting opportunity. So that isn't happening either. There are no good options, or there are no great options. There are a couple of good options, but right now, there's not really many good options at all. There were, at one point, pretty good options, but that's out the door now. So CJ Ogbonna, as far as they come, would be, I think, one of the better options available at quarterback in the transfer portal. Not one that moves me, not one that moves the needle, but I do think that he makes your quarterback room better. And like we talked about yesterday, when someone suggested Will Griffin reclassifying, it's not just about getting another body in the room, it's about getting experience in the room. And CJ Ogbonna, at the very least, would bring experience to the room. And I mean, really, if we're saying we want experience and he brings that, we're not going to be picking and choosing, right? Throughout his career, he's completed 600, or he's thrown 670 passes, dropped back 670 times throughout 4 years of playing. Southeast Missouri State was the school he was at between his JUCO and Buffalo. And so he's got playing experience, just now, again, looking into the transfer portal for 1 more year of eligibility. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Actually, we will be back later tonight after the Florida Gators hopefully beat the Missouri Tigers. Would be lovely to see on a Tuesday night. It's a late game, starts at 9 o'clock Eastern time, but we will be going live immediately after that for all of your Florida Gators needs, by the way. Locked On Gators. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI, and I'll see you all next time.